Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second lecture in our IBC Bank and Commerce Bank Keynote Speaker Series for 2025-2026. My name is George Clark, and I'm the director of the Center for the Study of Western Hemispheric Trade in TAMIU's A.R. Sanchez School of Business. So before introducing today's speaker, I'd like to thank our sponsors supporting the event, IBC and Commerce Bank. With their support, we've been able to bring many thought-provoking speakers over the years to TAMIU and Laredo to talk about topics in areas including international trade, economics, finance, demography, immigration, and border issues. So thank you very much. I'd also like to recognize TAMIU's brass ensemble, guided by Dr. Michael Mann. Thank you for playing tonight and for creating such an energetic and welcoming mood in the center. So before I introduce the speaker again, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping for the students here. At the end of Dr. Correa-Cabrera's presentation, there'll be a question and answer session. We'll take questions from the audience in attendance, as well as those who are joining us virtually. For those in attendance, please raise your hand and one of our students will bring you a microphone. If you prefer, you can submit questions through Slido using the QR code on the front of your program. For those attending virtually, you can submit your questions using the Q&A features in Teams. We'll try to address as many questions as our allotted time allows. For students attending in person and on behalf of one of your classes, you should have had your student ID scanned at the door. In addition, there's a QR code inside the program which will take you to an online form where you will submit your class information. Finally, you will scan your ID when departing once the lecture is ended. For students attending online, your class information should have been submitted during your registration process. So, today's speaker is Dr. Guadalupe Correa-Cabrera. She's a professor in the Shah School of Policy and Government and co-director of the Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Center at George Mason University. She's authored several notable books, including Los Zetas Incorporated, Criminal Corporations, Energy and Civil War in Mexico, Democracy in the Two Mexicos, Political Institutions in Huaco and Nuevo Leon, and most recently Frontera, A Journey Across the US-Mexico Border, co-authored with Sergio Chapa, who is also in our audience here. She's currently conducting research on human smuggling and transnational crime networks and is writing her upcoming book entitled Coyotes LLC. She's also edited and written many additional publications, is a past president of the Association for Borderland Studies, and has been involved in too many important projects funded by government agencies and foundations. So let's welcome Dr. Correa-Cabrera to TAMIU and to Laredo.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the sponsors of this event, IBC Bank and Commerce Bank. And thank you to everyone in this great university, Texas A&M International. I'm really deeply grateful that you invited me to a city that's very important for me. This region has been very important and fundamental for my work. I was born and raised in Mexico. I was an economist by training, and then I decided to study political science as a grad student, and my PhD is in political science, and I studied that in New York City. And my first academic job was in the Rio Grande Valley, in the University of Texas at Brownsville, and then UTB, and now UTRGV. I spent 8 years living at the border, so I believe that I'm a borderlander. This is where I met Sergio Chapa, my very good friend, the co-author of my latest book, Frontera, A Journey Across the US-Mexico Border. I had the opportunity to travel along the whole US-Mexico border, 3 times the whole US-Mexico border to write this book. This book was the product of 10 years of different visits to the borderlands, and we covered all the border municipalities in Mexico and the border counties in the United States, and we kind of like mapped everything. At the time that we were doing work connected to myself, he was a reporter. I have always studied illicit trade. I started to study the drug trafficking organizations, the complexities of drug trafficking organizations, and I centered on the study of Los Zetas. And Los Zetas, I was explaining today at lunch that really the cradle or the hometown of Los Zetas is the city of Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, even though the then leader of the Gulf Cartel, who brought former special forces of the Mexican army to the scene, to work with him, he did it in Matamoros, but he asked this group of people to come to Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, and this is where they tested their strategies, they militarized, and they changed the face of organized crime. So Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, and Laredo, Texas, these two Laredos are important for many things. It's not just like they are important for drug trafficking or this new model. It's not just a group of drug traffickers or cartels, and I'm going to explain today how organized crime has evolved and how wrong is to use the term cartels and strategies to deal with cartels or supply side policies to deal with a problem that is much more complex, and that the militarization of organized crime and a military response generated very high levels of violence that created a cycle that has not stopped. And further militarization, not only on the Mexican side, but also on the US side of the border, would probably make things worse. And this military model that Los Zetas brought to the scene, connected with the declaration of the war on drugs of Felipe Calderón, really created what I call a modern civil war, when you have civilians and non-state actors against the state that declare a war on cartels, a war on drugs. And now we have a different phase, which is a war on cartels, and I'm going to explain what has happened at the border. As I mentioned, while I was studying organized crime, I was also visiting the borderlands, and 10 years we wrote this book, Frontera, A Journey Across the US-Mexico Border, because the border, as you know, and the city, the border cities, important border cities like Laredo or Nuevo Laredo are not just about drugs, undocumented immigration, problems, drug trafficking, human smuggling, as everybody sometimes and the media represents or try to present what the border is about. So this book was an attempt to really depict what the border is about beyond the bad things, the negative connotations that the border have. Even though Sergio was covering at the time that we met also Mexico's drug war, or that's how it was kind of like defined at that time, because the president declared a war on drugs after the United States and after former President Nixon went after, utilized this concept, and everybody assigns to him this declaration of the war on drugs in the United States. But in this model that I studied, that Los Zetas brought, and the diversification of criminal activities, that the control of territory and the utilization of high caliber weapons and military strategies allowed this group and the groups that came after the diversification of criminal activities and the participation in other things that go beyond drugs. And this is what we have to understand when we talk about what in the United States are so-called cartels, because everything in the United States is connected with drug trafficking, or the discourse and the narratives connect everything that happens in Mexico to drug trafficking organizations. And it's not like that. We have to think about networks to understand what is happening today. So I'm going to explain a little bit what my research has been about. I'm about to publish another book in Spanish that is going to be in English, but this is for everybody, so most of you, I'm sure, will be able to read this book. This is going to be published in May of 2026. And the title of the book that adapts the model of Los Zetas, of course, and studies the evolution. I studied Los Zetas and Los Zetas Inc. as if it was a business. So it's the business model of Los Zetas analyzed through business administration, literature, and military strategy. Because we have to incorporate the two visions, because this is what it's about. It's a business, and I studied them as corporations. But because of the militarization of the security strategy, the groups and the kingpin strategy, the groups have divided themselves and they fight for control of territories. And we use a military model to understand this, and they have been dividing themselves because of the kingpin strategy itself. And then we have networks now. I mean, it's a very complex system. So we can use systems theory and social network analysis to understand this. We're not talking about cartels. Like my friend and colleague, Osvaldo Zavala, wrote in a book, and I know it's going to be, I mean, when I say this, people, don't take it really, really well, because cartels do not exist. Yes, they do not exist as cartels. Violence exists, and of course, homicides, disappearances, extortion, but it's because the system became very complex because of the militarization of the strategy itself. And when we hear about the Sinaloa cartel or the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, we're analyzing a new generation of criminal entities that can be analyzed as a complex system. And this complexity cannot be attacked with more militarization. I will explain why later on when I move forward with this presentation. So this book that I'm going to be publishing that's going to be published in May 2026 is kind of what inspired me to talk about what I'm going to be talking about. If we are, I still think that I am a borderlander, because I lived 8 years at the border, and I continue coming to the border, and I visit the border, and I study the borders. Now, Sergio Chapa and I are involved in other two projects that have to do with borderlands too, but now the southern border, the Mexico's border with Guatemala and Belize. We're going to cover it all, and we're going to produce a book, and we are in the process of translating Frontera in Spanish, because this is a region that is bilingual, binational, bicultural. And it's the product of two cultures. The culture of our borders in the two sides, we cannot explain the culture of this side without understanding what happens in Mexico. And that is something that we need to provide also. I mean, how a book, like a border book, is just written in English. It needs to be written in Spanish. And also in my career, I have written books in Spanish and English, and I try to, I try to communicate topics in the two languages to the people in my country and to the people in this country. I'm now a naturalized US citizen, but in reality, I was born and raised in Mexico, and I have the two worlds, and I feel this, I feel that I belong to this, to this culture, to this region, and I still feel that is home for me. And thank you for your invitation. And I'm going to explain throughout the years and now, how is the situation in Mexico? We hear about the cartels in Mexico, and this is always connected because of the national discourse that the fentanyl crisis has to do with the production of synthetic drugs in Mexico with precursors that come from China. That's kind of like the idea, the story. And the solution that has been presented is to declare a war on cartels, which would eventually, or maybe will lead into direct military action on Mexican soil. We started to hear about that in 2023, connected with a number of events that are related to what happens with Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación and the Sinaloa cartel. My new book is about this new generation of criminal networks, not corporations, because I study and analyze the evolution. I start explaining the model that Los Zetas brought, and then I explain the evolution of networks because of the kingpin strategy, because of the military strategy to deal with these organizations generated a complex adaptive system. And it adapts to the market, to the different realities, and this is exactly what I'm doing with Coyotes LLC. We're not talking about coyotes, we're talking about complex system of different actors that some of these actors work in two spaces. They dedicate themselves to illicit activities, but at the same time, they provide their services to, for example, in the case of we were talking about the 18-wheelers. We know that the 18-wheelers, that many of them cross through Laredo, we know of what has happened, the accidents in San Antonio, and where people have died. It happened in the year 2017, if I remember correctly. There was a very tragic event in San Antonio where several migrants died inside an 18-wheeler. We know, and I'm studying that, one of the models of human smuggling, and some people connect human smuggling with the cartels. The cartels are the human smugglers. Well, there's more complexity than that. And what is a cartel? Are we really going to end up with a cartel like bombing or sending a drone? Of course not. Because there are so many actors that participate in the activities that generate these violent spaces, that operate with political protection at many levels of government. And also, what happens in the United States and the fentanyl crisis has to do with actors that participate on US soil. There is a network of factors that also facilitate the distribution of drugs and the consumption of drugs in different spaces of the United States. Somebody receives the drugs, distributes the drugs, and make them available to the consumers in the United States. And that is not considered in the equation. And as I say, this system is very complex, and the actors we cannot understand it as a group that's led by El Chapo or Los Chapitos, which is what we hear in the news. But what has happened and why the war on drugs have failed? The war on drugs is a failed war, and the United States has lost this war in decades because there are more drugs that are consumed, and there are many more types of drugs that are consumed in the United States. In the years 2021 to 2023, there were more than 100,000 each year, 100,000 overdose deaths in the country, more than 100,000 deaths, more than the ones that drug-related violence have allowed in Mexico, which is also a tragedy. And drug-related violence in Mexico, or drug-related violence or violence related to organized crime in Mexico, it's also a tragedy. Because if there is demand, there's going to be supply. But the recipes to solve the problem that have been recycled and now magnified with the war on cartels have never solved the problem. On the other hand, the problem continues and extends in the United States. And why? Because we still talk about the narcos. We still talk about El Mencho, who supposedly deal with an organization that has presence nationally. A person that has to take dialysis, and it's going from one place to another one in Jalisco, in Nayarit, that has presence everywhere, which is kind of like, this does not make sense. So I am proposing a new way of looking at this, analyzing this through an analysis of networks and complex theory. So I'm going to explain a little bit what is in this book and how what has happened in Mexico does not necessarily has to do with drug cartels or with drugs. It's violence that has to do with groups that operate in certain spaces that control those spaces. It's extortion. Many of these groups have nothing to do with drug trafficking. Groups that are so-called, that call themselves Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, that control certain territories that have nothing to do with groups that call themselves Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación in other parts of the country. This is for sure. I have studied this phenomenon since the year 2010 in the United States, and I was in Brownsville, Texas. So I understand, how these things have evolved and how these groups have divided. These organizations that at some point dedicated themselves to traffic drugs, that found and were able to apply this militarized model that Los Zetas brought. You control a territory with access to high caliber weapons, with a military model. You control the territory and you control the illicit activities that are performed in that territory. But at the same time, you cannot control all of these activities and dedicate yourself to everything, right? Extortion, kidnappings, drug trafficking, fuel smuggling, human smuggling. No, you control the territory, so you extract rents. And some of the people, the drug traffickers, usually they don't perform their activities with violence. That's the thing. Because they are drug traffickers, they are business people. And so this is very complex, and all these groups can be understood with a different model. So let me start my presentation. So this presentation, and it always, I liked, and because I was in Laredo is probably the city where more people speak in Spanish. Everybody speaks Spanish in Laredo, Texas. So I wanted to combine the slides. Some of them are going to be, most of them are going to be in English, but I wanted to have some Spanish in the presentation. So I'm going to explain a little bit the general trends, which I have done, and the main security risks. And the main security risks, unfortunately now, are coming from the states themselves and from the United States. What would happen if, with the aim of dealing with the cartels, there comes a drone and destroys families, destroys communities? This is going to be a big tragedy. I mean, at this point, what we are seeing in Venezuela have affected dozens of people. But what would happen if drones strike communities in Mexico? This is not going to stop the cartels or the drugs that are entering the United States and are massively distributed in the territory. When there is a business, when there is demand, there's going to be supply. And the demand has not been addressed or will not be addressed, sending a drone in Mexico. And also, weakening and deviating resources to solve or create another problem. So I'm going to say what are the risks, and I'm going to also evaluate the risks of the Executive Order 14157, which is the executive order to designate drug trafficking organizations and other Central American gangs as foreign terrorist groups. Now we're not talking about drug trafficking, we're talking about narco-terrorism and what are the implications of that and why this is never going to help to solve the problems that we have. This just creates more militarization, and as we know, the militarization of the security strategy in Mexico has created this complex system. And this has divided these organizations into cells. And the cells adapt, and they generate more violence, and they adapt, and they can, dedicate one time, or specialize in fuel smuggling, because not all this, it's not like one group, like the Mencho is planning, like many people think, that El Mencho has the capacity to direct all the operations of what is called El Cártel Jalisco Nueva Generación. El Cártel Jalisco Nueva Generación and the Sinaloa Cartel can be analyzed in different ways. We're really talking about criminal franchises or criminal federations. And the DEA, actually, in his reports, even though present a situation in a way to justify the kingpin strategy, but they use these two concepts, criminal franchise to refer to the Cártel Jalisco Nueva Generación, and this is DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, the reports, and utilize the concept of criminal federation or federation of cartels or federation of gangs when referring to the Sinaloa cartel. And I think it's the right concept if we analyze it in different ways. But it's, for example, in the southern part of Mexico, there, and I have interviewed a number of people. I have interviewed a number of migrants who were kidnapped And they were also, I mean, there was another story in Univision, Telemundo. They did an amazing job interviewing people who were kidnapped in southern part of Mexico, in the state of Chiapas, near Palenque. And the kidnapping ring that operated there called themselves Cártel Jalisco Nueva Generación. So the migrants that were crossing through there, that had to ask their families for the ransom, and the families paid the ransom, they were afraid because they thought that their family members or themselves were in the hands of the Cártel Jalisco Nueva Generación. What really happened is that we have a group that operates with impunity in a certain part of the country with connections, in connection with the local police, local enforcement, where, provide protection, or at least allows this to happen, so they received also a bribe. So this is never gonna finish if we don't deal with the problem of corruption and impunity, and if we don't collaborate, because these activities harm not just Mexico or the migrants, but also generate a capacity that allow other criminal groups to operate, and in the end as well, allow the drugs to cross through different parts, because drugs also cross through Mexico. I'm not saying that cartels do not exist in terms of drugs do not exist and are not manufactured in Mexico, but also we have to think of the where drugs are manufactured. If all the precursors come from China, or precursors also come from the north. And Reuters showed how a number of a big amount of precursors are coming from Canada. That's something that we need to take into consideration and stop generalizing or simplifying a story and thinking that El Mencho deals with, or El Mayo Zambada that's now in the United States is gonna provide information, so we're gonna deal with the capos and just going after the narcos, like in Netflix and the Netflix series or the series of Telemundo, El Chapo or Narcos in Netflix and El Chapo in Telemundo, if the violence that we observe and if the tragedy in cities like Kensington or Skid Row or Camden in New Jersey are going to be solved this way. And what happens at the border? And this is where when somebody uses this phrase like cartels do not exist, people who live at the border, who have seen the violence, who have seen the brutality, particularly people who live in Laredo, Texas, and understanding what happened on the other side of the border, which was real. Heads, beheadings, dismembering of corpses, and people hung in bridges. That happened in Nuevo León. That happened in Reynosa. We covered that, Sergio. We covered that. We try to understand that model, and during the years that I have tried to understand the model, I understand this is a model that extracts strength from the people. It's a war against the people that operates in a militarized way, and this militarization to go after these groups also creates spaces where these groups need to kidnap and also extract rents. And it's not only about drugs. It's some groups dedicate to traffic drugs. And usually these groups do these things very silently without provoking the violence that you see in certain spaces. And criminal paramilitarization is something that this book also explains. So this is one of the main maps. I present several maps in the book that show, where the different crimes take place and what is the territorial presence of the different groups that operate with the data of Lantia intelligence. My friend Eduardo Guerrero, who is probably the main person and the main company that does this, that has collected all the data and really have, they have presented where the groups are located. So, at your reference, and I use these type of maps to see what is also how this is connected with natural resources. And my research has found throughout the years that spaces of high levels of brutality and violence connect very closely with the presence of natural resources. I will, it's not here. But this is kind of like this is what happened at the end of López Obrador administration from the years 2018, 2024. I mean, these are the number of victims of organized crime overall. Because here in the United States, and because of the government narrative, everything that is connected with violence in Mexico is done by the cartels. And we're talking about, as I said, these criminal paramilitary groups on the one hand, and these other groups, there are cells that control a territory and that exercise violence as well in order to be able to extract rents from the people. And it depends, like for example in Michoacán, the extortion against everybody, the owners of ranches of lemons, of avocados, of forestry, people in several parts of the state of Michoacán, for example, and I'm talking just about one state of Mexico when I started because my family is from there and my father was a victim of extortion and he had to leave his land because he didn't want to pay piso, and so they again asked him for piso and again asked him for piso, and the third time that he didn't pay, they said, if you don't pay piso, I'm gonna kill your son. So he had to leave his land because he was not going to enter into that, because my father had the capacity to just return to Mexico City and not stay there. But there are so many people who cannot move around and who cannot, who have their own land, their property, their family, their everything, and they need to pay the piso. So many people pay piso now, and we know what happened in Michoacán some days ago. They killed Carlos Manso, who was so-called the Bukele Mexicano, because he said, I'm tired of this and I'm going to apply mano dura policies, zero tolerance policies. I'm going after these criminals, and he was killed. So there's a big discussion, and the politicization, of course, of this discussion is not something that we like, but the reality is, and I know that from primary sources, that in Michoacán, in several parts, you cannot dedicate to any economic activity without paying piso to El Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, to Los Viagras, to all these cartels, which are really criminal groups that extract rents and adapt these names that sound, like Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, really a criminal franchise. It's really a criminal franchise, and these groups that ask for piso or that ask for extortion fees to allow people to exist. What they do is they have the capacity, they have the arms, they have the political protection, because protection rackets are important at different levels of government. And now, when the militarization of public security in Mexico, or just dismantling the federal police and putting the National Guard, and now under the military, is putting the military, this important institution in Mexico, under risk. And the connection that the military will have with these groups can turn things much worse, because we are really not understanding what is happening. We have to dismantle these networks and map the networks, and then take the nodes. And this is the way to do it, not like sending drones or having an involved. What are you going? Who are you going after? Because you have a complex system of people. Some people, in the case of Guerrero, some people cultivate poppy seed. Some people transport. And all these actors sometimes dedicate themselves to illicit activities. It's a very complex network that is not just connected with drugs. Some people just extract rents, dedicate themselves to ask for each migrant that crosses a territory a certain amount of money, And also, sometimes they directly move people. In certain places they do, in certain places they don't. This is very, very complex, and it's not like it's so easy to say felmencho, like sending like orders to all the cells that operate everywhere in the country. Cartels do not exist, but criminal networks and political protection and impunity and corruption exist and have caused hundreds of thousands of homicides in the country. So that's what I'm saying. Cartels or oligopolies, what's a cartel? A cartel is really an oligopoly like the pharmaceutical companies. The big pharma is the biggest drug cartel because they are a small group of companies that sit down and decide what's going to be the quantity that they're going to be producing, and they receive huge amounts of earnings because of that. The cartels are not cartels really because they are not oligopolies. Supposedly they fight among themselves to control the territories, right? So we're really talking about a network of illicit actors, local and transnational, that form complex adaptive systems. The reconfiguration of the Sinaloa cartel after El Chapo Guzman's capture in the year 2016 and El Mayo Zambada's eventual arrest because it was very weird what happened really when El Mayo Zambada and El Chapito ended up very close to here. On the other side, well, not very close to here, in El Paso, but close to the border. What happened is that the organizations are still alive and kicking, and they are more complex, and they have been extending their capacity. So, this shows is an example, a very good example of how a complex network operates. So, in order to understand the problem, we need to use complexity theory, network criminology, and system thinking. And this is what I'm explaining in the book that I am going to be publishing in May of next year. How you analyze that and how you map networks. And this is what we're doing right now in the center that it's called now the Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Center, that is going to be now called CONTRA, which is going to be Corruption, Networks, and Transnational Crime. Our new center is going to understand all these by mapping the networks. And this is what we're doing also with artificial intelligence, like getting all the cases, the judicial cases of human smuggling in the United States, and getting all the information and trying to draw the networks. This is what we're doing as well at George Mason University with technology. This is the way, and if you map the network, you get the nodes, you understand the connections, and you take the connections that are most important and the nodes, and then you dismantle the network. If you don't understand that, you're never going to deal with the problem, and the war on drugs will continue to be failed. Let me see. Okay, so this is, that's why I put it in Spanish, that it's not possible to conceive the Cártel Jalisco Nueva Generación without a very complex structure, a political structure, political and business structure behind it. We cannot understand that. If we think about the leadership, the absolute leadership of El Mencho, I mean, as I said, right, that sends orders to all his narcos at the national level, it doesn't make sense. So, no es posible concebir al Cuartel Jalisco Nueva Generación sin una complejísima estructura política y empresarial detrás. Pensar en el liderazgo absoluto de El Mencho, a cuyas órdenes atienden todos sus lugartenientes a nivel nacional, no hace sentido. Y esta es la narrativa. This is the narrative that has been used by the United States government. And it's not just like one party. I'm not partisan here. This is the narrative that has been used. And it cannot allow the United States to live more peacefully. Sergio and I visited a couple of times Kensington in Philadelphia. The tragedy of, I mean, that's another thing. The fentanyl crisis is a crisis. Yes, it is. It's a drug epidemic. It's not just the fentanyl crisis or opioid epidemic. It's an epidemic of the consumption of drugs, and mainly now synthetic drugs. And it's a reality. And why, like with billions of dollars that have been spent on operations of the US agencies have not solved the problem. And we still continue using the same strategies, going after the narcos. It's not a matter of narcos. It's a matter of dealing with in a comprehensive way with the problem. So, you know, this is something that, this is what the book that I will be publishing, those are like the main topics that this book is going to be talking about. I am talking about the new paradigm that I already explained. I'm talking about the new generation. That's why the book is called New Generation, the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación and the Sinaloa Cartel. And I analyzed the evolution that I studied corporations in Los Zetas Inc. From corporations to franchise or federation of criminal groups, utilizing the concept of the DEA. And then I explained that many of the groups that people call cartels are criminal paramilitary groups, that it's not like they are really protecting or exercising violence because they are drug traffickers. If they had been drug traffickers, they would not tell like the military to, please come and please attack us. It's a different thing. It's control for the territory. And I also touch on the war against cartels because I wrote an epilogue with this because it had to be considered, right? This new strategy that's probably going to define the future of hemispheric relations. Unfortunately, this needs to stop because otherwise this is going to cause a number of serious consequences. If we don't, because this is what happens. If we analyze, diagnose what happens and assess the situation, how it is, we're going to deal with the problem. But if you kind of like, or maybe the objective is a different one, or maybe the objective of your drug policy has been a different one because it has failed, and it continues and it's reproduced and it's extended with the cartel wars. What I do, and this is the last thing, which I, continue proving or testing. I'm not testing because it's not possible. But I just like analyze a relationship. That the spaces of violence are connected with energy extraction or the energy sector. And in Los Zetas Inc., during the time of the shale revolution, violence was concentrated in the northeastern part of Mexico and the Gulf of Mexico, and it was like this region that had very important reservoirs of oil and gas. And now, when I study the new generation, it's interesting because the violence is related more to the existence of rare earth minerals, lithium, and water in spaces that have to do with the energy transition. I'm not alleging anything. I'm just telling that there is a relationship. That's it. That's what I have found by mapping organizations, violence, and natural resources. So it's interesting, right? It's very, very interesting. It's very interesting what is happening in Venezuela. I'm also not alleging anything. I'm just telling you that Venezuela is the biggest oil country in the world. The biggest reserves of oil are located in Venezuela. That's a reality. I'm not saying anything else. So what has happened? What is the response to this horrible crisis, this drug epidemic? Has been the response? Current President Donald Trump, for the second time, the first day of his administration, he signed Executive Order 1457, which designated various Mexican cartels and other Latin American groups like MS-13 and El Tren de Aragua, which the Tren de Aragua I don't understand very well. What's El Tren de Aragua? El Cartel de los Soles is very difficult for me to understand it like an organization, right? I don't know El Tren de Aragua. Suddenly it became a big thing. And I understand the history in Venezuela, but suddenly, like, Venezolanos, like, went and migrated, and then, they were capable of controlling big areas in different parts of the Americas. I'm not sure about that. Because as I said, if you have spaces that are violent, if you have extortion, if you have kidnapping, that a lot has to do with political protection at the local level in the different places where they operate. And that happened in El Salvador, that happened in Honduras, and that happened in Guatemala during the times of the Maras. Maras still exist. And but in El Salvador, they kind of almost disappeared. Or the violence really was reduced to minimal levels if we compare them to the levels of 2015. And I'm not saying that this is a way to deal with the situation. I'm not saying that. I have to be very careful about that. We talked about this in the launch. But this is a reality. But here, there is the denomination, the designation of these groups, and more that came because also this list, the initial list added more groups to organizations of Ecuador, for example, as foreign terrorist organizations. But what are the consequences of this denomination? And the reality is that the denomination does not have extraterritorial realm, per se. And what have they done? The government has revoked visas of politicians and has frozen assets of individuals and organizations allegedly related to cartel activity. And the U.S. Department of the Treasury flagged the Mexican institution, these banks as they have ties because of the money laundering to the cartels. That is something that, under the definition, can be done. It can be done. You freeze the assets that are, laundered in your country through the banks that are Mexican, supposedly, and you revoke the visas of corrupt people. But the Boston Globe, a couple of weeks ago, had a very, very interesting article where 171 Sinaloa cartel members supposedly were arrested in where I'm right now, in the state of New Hampshire. And then Boston Globe reporters, a team, did this research where these guys were not Sinaloa cartel members, but they were shoplifters, drug consumers. They analyzed each of the profiles, or several profiles, of the 171 dangerous Mexicans that were connected to dangerous people that were connected to the Sinaloa cartel, right? So that shows how what happens at the distribution of drugs in the United States occupy different people, not the cartels, not the Mexican cartels. And we have to understand that we are talking about criminal franchises in the case of the probably Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, and a federation of gangs that work in different spaces with political protection at different levels, right? Some distribute, some transport. There are hawks, there are killers, there are a number of groups that operate in different activities and in different levels depending on the necessity. And they adapt and they provide their services in different ways just to complement sometimes their wages. And that's important also to consider. It's not like a narco and the stigma that people think because they see a lot of Netflix series. So that's one thing that we have to understand as well. The Trump administration, that's the problem, that has considered direct military operations at sea and foreign soil against these organizations. And one very big example are the strikes against Venezuelan ships without clear evidence that these ships were dedicated to big, massive operations that are taken to the United States and poisoning the American people. I haven't seen that. Probably there are, but I haven't seen that. And this is complicated because in the year 2023, I coordinated a special issue for a journal at UNAM about the war against cartels. And the possibility of direct military intervention, action in Mexico. This is not new. This has been touted as a possibility before that, and in 2023, all the Republican, the main members of the Republican Party were talking about this possibility, and we kind of analyzed that. The different authors, if you're interested, I can provide the reference. It's in Spanish. And Joseph Homayer, who is in the Trump administration, is also part of that special issue. Joseph Homayer is the Undersecretary for Western Affairs of the Department of Defense, Department of War, right now. So Joseph contributed to the special issue, and he has shown me a lot of how these things are seen. But the administration is very open, and it's a very interesting piece. His piece is very interesting because it shows what are really the foundations of Trumpism. It's basically, I wrote the part of the war against cartels, but it's about America first in its second phase. So I really recommend that you read the articles, because most of them are, I mean, we have Mexicans and American scholars in that special issue. And the issue, the one that I wrote was like, capturing all the moments and all the discourses through content analysis of how, main players in the Republican Party were all talking about direct military intervention in Mexico. So this is a possibility. This is a great possibility. And the future of Venezuela is, is still, it's immediate. We're going to see what is going to happen with this denomination that goes beyond the poor denomination itself, that only allows action in the United States. But with that in mind, and this is what we were fearing, that the denomination itself will change the whole rules of the game and will allow military action outside U.S. borders. So the U.S. government has escalated the supply side drug control policies with a focus on cartels and maintains the kingpin strategy abroad, going after the Chapitos and Menchitos and all these guys that have different names and that reproduce themselves and come another one, and the cousin and the wife and everybody that, this is being reproduced. Well, here I provide, and I have a very short paper with policy recommendations, and this is kind of like what I would think, because always like we kind of like criticize and we don't provide recipes or recommendations to do things better. And I think that this executive order should be stopped, and this approach should be completely stopped. And we need, and this is something that it's not rocket science, that has been presented in, for example, the bicentennial framework, which was the result of a high-level meeting between Mexico and the United States officials. And, they propose a comprehensive strategy with an appropriate mix of drug prevention programs to deal with addiction, harm reduction strategies, recovery from substance abuse and addiction, as well as effective law enforcement and community policing. The enforcement part is important, the prevention part is important, the demand for drugs is important, and the sharing of intelligence, going after money laundering, anti-money laundering, effective anti-money laundering strategies. And this is all described in the bicentennial framework. But unfortunately, when the bicentennial framework started in 2022, the implementation 2023, the DEA came up with that day of the bicentennial framework, DEA offered some ransom against Los Chapitos, right, for the arrest of Los Chapitos, unluckily. So, an initial step would be to also fight misinformation and start calling the things and start informing better with education and reliable data the causes of this large crisis, right? And the demand part of it is very important. Without dealing with the demand, without an appropriate treatment of people, we're going to continue having this, and the demand and the supply is going to come from sheep, from air, from everywhere, and it's going to be produced in this country too. It's not just come from Mexico. Now we're talking about synthetic drugs, and everybody can produce in a lab in the United States as well. So we don't know how many of the drugs are. I mean, why all the drugs have to be produced in Mexico? That's something that, because we're talking about synthetic drugs. We're not talking about cocaine. We're not talking about, agriculture. We're talking about labs. Why all the labs should be concentrated in Mexico? I'm just asking. We don't have any evidence, right? But there are no investigations in the United States. So I think that the policy of designating Latin American criminal groups as FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations, is a big thing and redefines international cooperation, reopens longstanding dilemmas surrounding sovereignty, legitimacy, and effectiveness in the fight against transnational organized crime. And I say, this is my own opinion. It's crucial to terminate this policy and reintroduce the public health and governance dimension. The U.S. fentanyl crisis is foremost a public health and institutional resilience challenge, not solely a security issue. Sustainable solutions require restoring cooperation frameworks that integrate prevention, rehabilitation, and harm reduction, while also reinforcing anti-corruption and financial transparency mechanisms. That's kind of like, I work on the paper with specific recommendations, but this is already there. So many politicians that have worked together, the two governments worked together to produce the bicentennial framework. 3 pillars of the bicentennial framework when they terminated and finished the Merida Initiative. That would take into consideration Mexican needs and Mexican points. But of course, also, the Mexican government has proven to just okay, what about arms trafficking? Yes, take care of your customs. The same way as we tell the United States, right? Okay, yes, the cartels. What about your customs? Who received the drugs? Who accepts the drugs? Is there corruption on the U.S. side of the border? I believe so as well. So, and you know that, right? We are in the biggest port of entry, and I learned the Western Hemisphere today. So no country in the hemisphere can solve the synthetic drug crisis alone, as the United States pretends to do. A shared responsibility approach, balancing enforcement with public health imperatives, is kind of the way to go. So thank you for your attention to these, and I'm looking forward to the questions. And also, I would like, Sergio and I also came here to share Frontera with you. It's a book that, what I'm telling you now, it's not just what we need to focus on when talking about the border. The border is beautiful. The border has amazing people, like the people that are sitting in this room. And we have to, this is a celebration. Sergio and I wanted to celebrate what the border is about. We, of course, talked about organized crime, but we talked about the margaritas, the food, the music, the movies, the important people that has been born on both sides of the borderlands. And Sergio's here. We want to translate the book of Frontera in Spanish. And thank you for being here.
So thank you for the talk. We're going to enter into the question and answer session. So if you're online, you can enter questions into the Q&A, and we'll read as many out as we can. If you're in the audience, please just raise your hand, and we'll take your questions. We have a question over here to start.
Hello. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I'm a faculty member here. I also study a little bit about systems thinking and system dynamics aspects. So when you mentioned the solution has systems thinking roots, I was kind of expecting to see a little more discussion on how systems thinking approach is used in creating these solutions. If you can elaborate a little bit more about the
Absolutely.
systems thinking aspects in coming up with these recommendations, I'm sure we all can enjoy better and the students will learn a lot. Thank you.
Great, of course. Yes, I didn't present the complexity right because at first it was important to kind of like bring the critique of the current narratives and a critique of the concept of cartels. And sometimes when you do that, people resist to think in those terms. So we have, and this is something that law enforcement should do, because in order to map this system, you have to have a lot of intelligence, and academics are going to do it too, because you kind of like, but the problem that I have found, like when accessing the information that is available, for example, the Lantia intelligence database, it's built upon the idea that cartels exist as that. And it's a problem because the mapping of these groups, El Cártel Jalisco Nueva Generación, no. We have to analyze where these groups are operating without naming them and mapping, okay, this is the Cartel Jalisco, this is the Sinaloa Cartel, where the spaces that create violence and what they are doing. So you kind of map them and you connect them. Because, for example, in Sonora, and I was in Altar, Sonora, so smuggling of people and drugs connect, but it's not necessarily, in some spaces, the drugs and the people are moved, but in some other spaces, these people charge the smugglers money for them to cross through their territory. And I have talked to some coyotes, the big time, in Altar. And this is very complex, right? So we have to have the mapping, we have to map the network. And then, this network is dynamic. So, I mean, I didn't do it here, of course, and thank you for that. As you say, the theory is to study this complexity of complex systems. Like, for example, RAND Corporation has a lot of reports on that, and they know how military strategy works, right? So you have a network. What we're doing, for example, with human smuggling networks, we have analyzed a lot of information from the judicial cases of smuggling before Operation Gatekeeper in 1990, from 1990 till today. So extract text. So you kind of like see where the nodes are geographically, by method, and then if you find that there's a region like here, for example, for me, this is a very important region because the model of the 18-wheelers, right? And the model of what happens here with the stash houses. Stash houses are not in Nuevo Laredo. Stash houses are in Laredo. There are several articles, right? So with that, this is something that I don't know how to do because I work with the computer science people. And this is what they are doing. They are using machine learning to extract the information and mapping the networks that are changing because it's a complex system, so it changes. What happens if a policy changes, or what happens if, enforce an operation, dismantle a network here, it goes to somewhere else. And this is something that engineers can do by utilizing the technology and by extracting information from the cases, for example. So kind of like, this is what enforcement needs to do. This is not a work for researchers. We can only explain how this works, but this is what law enforcement needs to do, not bombing communities in Altar because there are good people there, or in Camargo, in Caborca, for example. I know so many great people, Sergio too, right? We know so many great people. We have friends in Caborca. We go to Caborca. And Caborca is a land of Caro Quintero. Rafael Caro Quintero, and supposedly he created El Cártel de Caborca. Now, the nephew of Pelos Chinos, they have these names, right? Yes, we all know that. The people who have studied these things, we know El Pelos Chinos, we know the Cartel de Caborca, we know the Deltas and los Paleteros and all these guys. No, they exist. But it's not that it's like the Sinaloa cartel. It's because they have a capacity to operate in that region. But if you bomb, it's very interesting because when we were in Caborca, no, you were not there, Sergio, this time. People were very frustrated of what was happening in Caborca. And they were like, I like the model of Nayib Bukele. I like Trump. I mean, Trump is great, and we want, we want that they come and destroy these horrible people because they were desperate. But how this is going to happen? You're going to throw, you're going to strike through drones? And I said, you're asking to be attacked yourself. You told me that by your house, you think that there are bad people living. If a drone comes, it's going to destroy your family too. That's going to be very complicated. And he was thinking, but they are desperate. What about impunity, corruption, political protection? We have to deal with that. And Mexican government needs to be responsible. Not just saying, oh, yes, the arms trafficking. Yes, look at your customs. Why arms come to your country? Because you allow them to enter. The same thing with the United States, right? Why people and why drugs enter? Because people are needed in this country. That's why coyotes make a lot of money, because you don't want people to come. Then fine or send to prison the bad guys. Right? So this is the complexity that I'm talking about. So you take the notes and then you dismantle the network.
So we already have a lot of questions online, so I'm going to start. I'm going to start with a couple of these. So the first question comes from Slido, so someone in the audience probably, and it said, what role can local universities and students play in reducing vulnerabilities to organized criminal networks?
Well, and I said that in one of the, there's so many roles that students can play in this. One thing is, is really the education and the analysis that will go beyond what we see in Netflix series, right? We have to study, we have to analyze, we have to take and participating. So many of our students, are going to participate in law enforcement. I learned today that the criminology department here in TAMU is the biggest one, right? They can play role with education, with information, and information that goes beyond your own space. Because what happened, and without prejudice, right? There's a lot of prejudice as well. But students are the future. And students need to, dedicate a lot of time and effort to do well what they are doing, which is studying. And they can participate in many ways.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any more questions from the audience? We have one over there.
Sorry. Okay. Well, thank you for your presentation. I'd like to ask for your perspective on a recent statement made by Mexican Senator Lili Tellez, who has argued that Mexico has become a narco state, and has even called for the U.S. involvement to help combat what she describes as a criminal capture government. So how accurate or grounded do you find this characterization of Mexico as a narco state? And what implications would they have for U.S. and Mexico?
Okay, this is a great question. I have a personal assessment of certain characters in Mexican politics, because of course, you know that politics is about power, how to access power. Ricardo Salinas Pliego, Lili Tellez, that are the opposition against Claudia Sheinbaum. And Claudia Sheinbaum also generating her own narrative. Oh God, homicides, I came and homicides have lower 25%. Well, no, that's not true. If you count them better, if you see what are the tricks like, counting the homicides and the reduction, it's only 4%. really. I mean, 14%, if you don't count if you count them better, because local, the local attorney general, the fiscalías locales are, using the numbers in the way that they are not counting the homicides and they're counting on other events, right? So we have these two groups, right? Lili Tellez is an actress in Mexican politics, and Mexico has big problems of security, huge problems. Impunity, corruption, organized crime that dominates large spaces of the territory. That is for sure. But this word of a narco-state, it's wrong, as I explained to you, that a number of events that happened, or the extortion, kidnapping, fuel theft, and all of those activities are performed because of political protection at different levels. It's a narco-state, it's not a narco-state. It's a state with very high levels of corruption and impunity. And many of these groups don't harm Americans. They harm the American people. They extract rents. It's a war against the people from so-called cartels. Criminal groups, criminal paramilitary groups, because they're paramilitarized, have access to high-caliber weapons and control territories in order to extract rents. This is not a narco-state. This is a state without law, corrupt, impunity. This needs to be solved. And also trying to hide the reality from our people. I mean, the popularity of Claudia Sheinbaum, thanks to the predecessor Andrés Manuel López Obrador, has provided the government with the capacity of concentrating power and of managing as well the narrative. They have the capacity through the Mañanera of setting the agenda of media and the discourse. And is it good? No, because it's not solved. I mean, what has happened in Guerrero? What is happening in Michoacán? What happens in Sinaloa? What happens in Tamaulipas? I was talking to one person here in the audience, and the situation just changes, but it's not good. So it's what is happening is not a narco state, and not going with the narratives of the United States, because the narratives of the United States have other objectives. Today, with China occupying more and more spaces in the Americas, we have to understand that as well, right? So they're like, oh, Trump, come. As I told these people in Camargo that were my friends, that are good people, that were tired of this violence. They could not take their kids to play in the park because of all the assassinations, because all the homicides, because all the violence that's perpetrated against the people. Are they drug traffickers? They control territories to extract rents, to generate fear. And so people will be fearful of them, and they're going to pay piso. And so I think that, it's kind of like the discourse, and we have to not to simplify like Lili Tellez simplifies all the time. She's an actress, and it's very painful to see a politician of that level acting in that way, because it's not just, shouting and, I'm part of CPAC and I'm part of the red people and whatever. It's really, working together with your political opponents to solve the problems, to criticize in a way, not just to get to where the other is, but to provide information and solutions. And they are not doing. The opposition in Mexico is really shameful, the way that they are also distorting reality. Thank you.
So I have another question from online. Do you think that the cartels or criminal networks have given Mexico more control over drugs in the US than I suppose they would have had otherwise? This is from Daniela Martinez.
Can you repeat the question?
Do you think that the cartels, criminal networks, have given Mexico more control over drugs in the US than they would have if the cartels or criminal organizations didn't exist in their current form?
No, I think, and this is a great question, because usually, and this is the narrative in the US, everything is about the Mexicans. All the bad people are brown, and they come from Mexico. I mean, this is the way that we think about cartels, right? Cartels are Mexicans. But what about the network that operates in the United States that take the drugs that people consume in the United States? There are zones where everybody can consume whatever they want, like Kensington, like Skid Row. It's free zone to consume whatever. It's a drug. I mean, drugs are whatever drug you want. You consume it in the United States. What is happening there? So who has the control? Are the cartels having a control of what happens in the United States? I love to see the DEA maps. Like when Los Zetas came, right? They are controlling Texas. And you saw the maps with Los Zetas everywhere. Even there was an article in 2011 about how Los Zetas had controlled San Antonio. Austin. I'm like, no. I mean, it's as we know, as we saw in 2000, and you were witnesses of that. 2011 till 2015. You crossed the border, you crossed the bridge, and the violence was over. This is one of the safest cities in the United States. And the cartels, it's about the demand in the US and the distribution, and we know very little about that in the United States. So I don't think this is gonna help.
First of all, thank you so
Wait.
much. Thank you very much for a fascinating presentation tonight. And I have a question. So it's a follow-up to what you had just mentioned. Could you speak a little bit more to the structural or political reasons that the demand dimension receives less emphasis in research and public discourse?
Sorry?
Yes. Could you speak to the structural or political reasons the demand dimension receives less emphasis in research and public discourse?
Yeah, well, I have to make assumptions here, right? I have to make assumptions here because it's hard for me to understand why there is a problem of drug consumption in the United States that in the past century, in the previous century, 20th century, a US president say, let's declare a war on drugs. And then, there is a focus on targeting the leaders of drug trafficking organizations. And they have arrested, or there are petitions of extradition. Mexico has extradited so many narcos to the United States. And now, they have so many because Claudia Sheinbaum has sent to the United States a group of very high-level targets, right? And it's all supply-side policies. But why? If it has failed, if it has not addressed the problem, usually in public policy, when you kind of assess a policy, you have an objective, right? What is the objective of the war on drugs? What is President Richard Nixon? It's saw what is happening with drugs and how they affect the people. So if something is not working, you kind of redirect your efforts and your resources, and you do something different. And so many people, analysts, politicians, public administrators, several people have said, let's focus on the demand. We need a comprehensive strategy. So why? This is an assumption. Why are you so incompetent? Incompetent that you have spent billions of dollars since last century to solve a problem in the 70s? What is happening? Why is that? Maybe, I don't know. Incompetence? It's a possibility. Or maybe drug policy in the United States is not about reducing the number of drugs, but having presence abroad, having intelligence and having capacities. I don't know. I don't know really what happens. I'm not posing, probably it's posing some conspiracy hypothesis of why, why you're not spending resources to really solve a crisis that would be solved if you focus on the demand, on the supply, you prevent things from happening and share information. And with all the power that you have, impose certain conditions. But you kind of like go on against, you go after narcos. And it doesn't work, and it doesn't work, and it creates a problem, and we now have complex adaptive systems operating. So why? I don't know. It's very difficult for me to accept that more drugs enter to the United States. We have bigger problems, different kinds of drugs. It's not just marijuana. Now marijuana is produced here. And marijuana is produced here. So now we have a problem with synthetic drugs. Fentanyl. And when you talk to the people in all these places, it's the places that are open to all the consumption of drugs, open air drug markets. That's how they call them. These open air drug markets, people tell you, what is your favorite drug of use, or I don't remember what is the question, right? And they say brown dope. They don't say fentanyl. They consume everything. They consume pills, and they consume what is cheaper at some point. They even have consumed other type of drug, not only fentanyl, the right? Tranquilizers for animals, and that has been killing a lot of people. So, why? I don't know. It's very interesting.
So I'll take another question from online. What are your thoughts on the new international bridge that they're building near Laredo? It's built south of Laredo near Highway 83. The area they're building in is very near a significant smuggling corridor.
Usually, well, I don't know. I didn't know that, and I don't know the land, and I'm not very familiar, to be very, very honest, about this bridge and how, it's very interesting when we talk about drug trafficking or drug smuggling. It's kind of like everybody has stories or theories about these tunnels, right? The other day I was in a conference about these tunnels. A person wrote about the tunnels, and I was like, but I don't think that drugs are transported in tunnels and people are, it's just like, this fantasy sometimes, and I'm not very familiar with that, and I cannot say, oh yes, they're constructing that in order to help the cartels. I don't think so. Cartels enter through 18-wheelers, and it's like, it's very easy. Mm-hmm.
I can hold it, it's okay. Thank you, Dr. Correa. I just have a question. One of the points that I liked was about more community activities where you have drug rehabilitation and things like that. My question is that, have you tried looking at this from the perspective of parasitism? Because in evolutionary biology, you have parasitism where the end result is that the systems go into equilibrium. I'm not a believer in a zero-sum game, but my wife has said that, can we focus on the demand side? So my question is that, can we increase more triage resilience so that you can really address the issue rather than trying to eradicate it, because that's not working, obviously.
Yeah, that's another possibility, right? There are different. That's a great question. You ask very good questions. There is and I'm going to repeat something that I said in the launch today. One of the possibilities that everybody's saying, right, okay, legalize everything. So we get rid of the problem in the sense that, legalize everything so we get rid of the bad guys that create violence and, the American is going to regulate itself. This is a liberal perspective, right? And there are liberal writers. The person, the last name is Escotado. He wrote about how drugs have been historically used by everyone as like prostitution, right? You just regulate and whatever. That's one perspective. And the other perspective is zero tolerance, like the Chinese, right? But as I mentioned, this is not going to happen here, hopefully, because only it can happen in a totalitarian regime. China, if you're a drug trafficker, they kill you. And if you're a drug consumer, they send you to a rehab center that's really a prison managed by military personnel. And the numbers, according to them, I don't know. I don't speak Chinese. I don't know China. I know very little of China. Yeah, I know China, but I don't, but the system, they have almost nothing in terms of drug overdose deaths. So you have these extremes, right? The liberal perspective, libertarians will be happy to just like, or regulate or liberalize the utilization of drugs. So you take off or kind of like charge tax, like in terms, with regards to alcohol and cigarettes, right? That's the way that liberals think of this. And this is the other sort of zero tolerance. Or is there another option? It seems as for Chinese, they had the opium wars. They suffered a lot. They lost the capacity. They lost everything. And so that's why here in the United States there is a thought that, it's another phase of the opium war. It's the same thing. The fentanyl crisis, the war against fentanyl and things like that, right? So Chinese are very conscious about that. And it's very interesting because Chinese people are like, oh, no, the drugs are zero. There's no way that I'm going to do that. That's why, and they are very proud of the way they had eradicated the problem, like overall. They are happy, but it can only happen in a totalitarian regime where you can be killed if you are trafficking drugs. And you maintain the order, right? Are you going to kill your own people because dealers are part of the network and they are narco-terrorists too? No, really. You're participating in the network. You're distributing the drugs. And the corrupt authorities on this side of the border are also part of the network. But we're just focusing on what happens on the other side when the distribution is not understood correctly. So if you go against the cartels, you should start here. You should start also with the banks, with your own banks, because a number of assets of the drug cartels are laundered in the United States. And we know about that because of the cases of these big banks.
Okay, let's take one more question from the audience, but we need to keep it quick because we are running out of time. And then I'll give you one very quick question from the thing, and then we'll have to wrap up,
Absolutely.
unfortunately.
Regarding what you said, that these are major corporations, they're also able to withstand major casualties. So unfortunately, they seem to have an impeccable recruitment. What is the driving factor behind this, and what's your perspective on it?
Yeah, the recruitment, absolutely. We're talking about businesses, right? And when I talk about networks, there are actors. And actors are individuals or groups, or organizations, right? And the recruitment is part of it. The thing is that the way that we think about that, because of the narratives of basically the U.S. Law enforcement agencies, is that, the cartel is recruiting people to participate with them. Yes, we have these small organizations or big or whatever, and they recruit people in order to generate these spaces of violence, to control, to all that. So what is happening? The political protection that allows these groups to operate in certain parts of our territories, like the Maras Salvatruchas and Barrio 18 in Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. So they are going to operate and they're going to recruit. And that's what is driving, the recruitment is a big deal. When I was conducting research in Tijuana last year, before Trump arrived to power, there were a lot of people because of CBP-1, and they knew that they were going to be processed into the United States. So a number of people were were crossing through Mexico. And a number of Mexicans were trying to go to the United States because they they were recruited in Chiapas, for example, no, in all this region of Tapachula, by groups that were extorting migrants themselves. This is the cartel. Basically, this was the cartel, and they say they're Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. But their main business there was to take money from migrants that were crossing from all parts of the world, because they could do it because of the legislations and the United States, the capacity they have to be released into the United States after Title 42, with CBP-1 and, So, yeah, so the recruitment is a reality, and it has to do with political protection and with all these incentives. There's more complex than just like cartels. It's your policies, your corruption, other corruption, and all these different actors that can participate because of the political and the policy aspect of it. So we have to think about all these questions instead of just thinking about recruitment by these bad guys, right? They need to recruit people because they can't do it, but they recruit them for different purposes. Thank you.
Okay, to wrap up with a final question from Hugo Barron online, a very easy, quick one. How do you see the future of the border in the next 10 years if significant changes are not implemented?
Oh, well, no, it is not an easy question. Well, we're going to maintain the same situation, right? We have a wall, and selectively you open it for migrants to come because it's open for migrants to work. And the problem is that we have more military now in the U.S. side of the border. And really, if you intervene, if we maintain this, we're going to have a reproduction of the war, and it's going to be worse. It's going to be worse. And now on this side of the border, because we are not dealing with the root causes, and we're not dealing with the problems in a comprehensive way. I don't know. It's a difficult question.
Thanks.
It's the most difficult one.
Thanks. I apologize to anyone who didn't get their question read, and I apologize to people online who submitted questions that we didn't get to. But I want to thank Dr. Correa-Cabrera for an excellent talk. We give all our speakers a globe.
Thank you so much.
In memory of Tammy Yu.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for your hospitality. Thanks for the sponsors. Thanks to the to Texas A&M International University, IBC Bank, and Commerce Bank for the generosity and for organizing this and for the invitation. Thank you so much.
So before everyone leaves, I'd like to thank everyone who made this event possible. I'd like to thank IBC and Commerce Bank again for their generous support of this lecture series. I would especially like to thank Amy Palacios, who's the Associate Director of the Center for Western Hemispheric Trade. She manages everything to do with this event, that gets the food here, the people here, and everything like that.
Thank you.
Finally, I'd like to thank the staff in the center and the School of Business who donate their time to help us with the event, OIT, who do the broadcasting, Event Services, who provide the excellent food, and the students from the Dean's Advisory Council who have been out at the door and also bringing around the microphones. We wouldn't be able to do this without everyone involved, so thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. George, and thank you for everything as well. For